Hello everybody, it is I, Brother Kenneth, on the Art of the Deals. Topic, possessed babies. Let's go over a few things, common sense, critical thinking notes. And the first thing I want to add to this is that, remember, the baby is possessed. How did it get there? Okay, and what are the parents like that this would happen? And are they baptized? Obviously the baby was just born, so that wouldn't apply there. Now, all of these elements, the more you get, the negative responses on that. No, they're not baptized. Oh, yes, we're pagan, and we practice witchcraft, for example. And going down the list, the more and more of those are yes, and the wrong things, and no and the right things that are going through life. Oh, yes, we like to do hallucinogenic drugs and LSD and all that stuff. Besides having birth defects, now you're going to have a spiritual birth defect. And that could be possession. I mentioned online that a scenario that it was actually presented in the idea of the Nephilim, and we brought the Nephilim up before. The reality is the demons did not come, the fallen angels did not look upon and lust after women, and then decide you're going to go have intimate affairs with them. They cannot create life. They don't carry the seed that man has been given by God to procreate. They can't do that. They can't borrow it as a succubus and then go over and deposit it as an incubus and make a woman pregnant. No. Quit mixing your Jewish mysticism and Book of Enoch Apocrypha nonsense. The Book of Enoch is so wrong in so many ways, and it's not like, ooh, they didn't want them to know the truth. They hid the truth. No, it's nothing like that. Get out of fantasy land. And I hate to say it because people are reading this stuff thinking, ooh, I got a special knowledge. The Book of Enoch. I discovered a secret book. No, it's not a secret book. No, it's not a lost book. It's a book that was, probably never even considered. I wouldn't doubt that if the book was never at the Council of Nicaea. Now these, Dead Sea Scrolls had showed there was a copy of it. I don't think it was at Council of Nicaea. And besides that, when you know your theology, you know your demonology, the nature of God and Jesus and so forth, you should be able to figure this stuff out on your own. Like what would house a human soul? In what cases would a test tube baby, would it have a soul? You remember that back in the 1970s, the National Enquirer had article after article about test tube babies, and that, the test tube baby, things are starting to move, around it like it's haunted or it's possessed or something. And I read something about it 25 years later, the test tube baby has got this family and looked perfectly normal. It's got a soul because it still used human seed, and it went into a woman. It wasn't done in a laboratory without a man or a woman, because the initial components, even if they got the egg from the female and the seed from the man, there was still a man and woman essence on that. And that's what people need to pay attention on. That it doesn't mean they're going to be born in the best spiritual shape, being created in this more unusual way that's outside the bedroom, so to speak. But the fact is, all the right elements are there. And it can't be done by bringing two eggs together or anything like that. It's got to be these two components. See, I don't believe most of this stuff. I think they're trying to mess with us on what humans actually are and what a miracle life is. Okay, so let's go back to the main topic, of course. Again, we get sidetracked. The baby possessed. Okay, so Father Chad had a case, possessed baby case, but this baby that Father Chad had, it couldn't walk, can't pull itself up, can't, do this and that. As soon as the demon stepped in, it was like Chucky. It could walk, run, it can grab you. So you have to ask yourself, did something get that demonic? How would this happen? So I made this presentation of an idea on a forum, basically saying the fault would be a possessed baby if the mother and the father were both possessed. But you got to realize what would cause one to be vulnerable enough to be possessed anyway. And then, in addition to that, what are the odds that this child that Father Chad was talking about would become possessed if both parents aren't possessed? What do they do to make this child possessed or to affect it in such a way that caused such a degrading spirit in that generational line for this to happen? Well, I can pretty much bet that, say both aren't baptized, it's always God's permissible will when this sort of thing happens regardless, including the fate of such people. Satan is dying without changing or converting. We don't know what their ultimate fate. But ideally, because we know there's a lot of variable, and one of them is God's permissible will and the free will, the parents, what got them there, why are they there, were they consecrated to Satan? Too many variables, but ideally the child would by default be possessed. And without going over a huge list, trust me on this. Okay, this is a kind of a theology of a kind of a morbid curiosity. But the reality is we should not expect anything good to come from having a child not being in the state of grace, baptized in the church, and then trusting everything to go normal without consecrating the child in that certain way. By being baptized to bless your marriage or bless your relationship instead of just somebody you'd shacked up with and you get pregnant, the more things you do out of the zone of good and into the realm of sin, you're going to get your life cursed more and more. It should be by default to be expected to have maybe even birth defects. And don't pull that opposite side like, well, my parents were really religious, but they had one of their kids and they had missing arms and legs. Well, you know what? If I really looked into that case, we might find the reason for it. But the observation from the onlooker is that they're really good people. We had a couple people in one of my churches who were Satanists, generational Satanists. Oh, they look sweet old people, with the little smiles in the yearbook and all that stuff like that. But you can't judge a book by its cover, even your parents to some degree. I mean, how well do you know your parents? How well do you know that couple or whatever? That we don't know them. And when we ask them things, if we got a chance to investigate them, are they telling us the truth? Because we go to succubus and incubus cases, and the last thing they want to tell us is that they've been thinking about having another man or a woman, whatever the case may be, because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want their spouse finding out about it directly or indirectly, and they avoid it for any number of reasons, and they're not going to reveal the truth. Well, don't expect everybody to tell you the truth and why, this might have happened. Why do you think that is? They're not going to tell you. Eventually it will come out, but it might have to be hammered out of them through their personal experiences of being oppressed, affected, haunted, possessed, or whatever, or someone near they love, or it's in their family, or it's a friend, or whatever, to the point where it basically backs them against a wall and makes them, I got to fess up on this stuff. You might pray for that they'll actually get honest with you, because it'll get to the truth faster. One guy talked to me for a period of a month, a few talks on the phone call, and he failed to reveal to me that he has a porn addiction. Okay, thought I went through that checklist already, but then it comes out and he doesn't act like it's anything, and it's like, excuse me, you just found something really big right there, and so he mixed it with ghost hunting. So it's the same as like mixing it with some other cult practice, because you're going to haunted places that have demons, and demons that are there are going to relate to your state of grace, and they're going to go home with you, and then you're going to bring all these attachments. The more you do. And also, these teams will have witches on them, other kind of pagans and so forth, and practicing necromancy of different forms, electronic devices, pendulums, Ouija boards. So you're right in the thick of the occult. And the two together, immorality, and we'll draw incubus and succubus, but it'll draw different types of spirits as well, because they're there at the doorway, and you gave them two reasons to basically be there, and two lethal ones too. The top three things that we have to deal with that are most common, that actually cause a lot of problems, are immoral practices, sinful sexuality, etc., and forms of the occult. The more serious, black witchcraft versus stuff that just like, I think I'm just calling nature spirits. It's worse when you're doing voodoo or you're doing Satanism, and where you actually acknowledge that it's dark forces, instead of just thinking it's some sort of like magical fairy in the woods or something. It's because it's intention and it's knowledge of what you're doing, because free will has several levels where these things will all interplay. Okay, so how do we really say this, except, like I said, it's a hypothetical to some certain degree, because every situation is not perfect. It's like the hypotheticals might be an incorrect model, because it says ideally that would happen now when the two parents actually are possessed, which is the case of the Nephilim. Both parents are possessed, and then they have a child that's possessed, just like you might see in that movie, The 13th Warrior. Obviously, if this woman has a baby down in that cave, and so they're still procreating somehow down there. But obviously, they just weren't angry natives or something. They were demonically possessed. So, how can that happen? How can God allow that? The parents allowed it. We can leave our children with babysitters that molest them. The parents have a lot of things they're going to answer for by their negligence, by their abuse, by their lack of this, their lack of that, by too much of this, too much of that. They feed them. Some kids got fed little sippy bottles with apple juice in it, and their teeth are jagged and they got yellow, it's like they all rotted out. So parents do a lot of stupid stuff. We're very responsible for our children and how they grow and everything like that. So why would you expect it not to happen? The extreme. And if you're going to dip in the dark side and then you're going to come together and have a baby, that you should not expect it to really be a blessed baby, so to speak, just because it's an innocent baby. We already know the sins of the parents affect the child, even to some degree after they've been baptized, the parents, and then they conceive the child and the child's baptized, because something lingers, the effect that weakens that line. That's why they had to wait so long after the fall of David and the fall of his son Solomon. Well, they would have had Jesus like maybe a couple generations, but look how long it went before the next generation came to where here comes Mary, here comes Joseph, here comes Jesus from the Blessed Mother. But that's what we got to understand. We got to understand how this stuff works. We call it generational effect rather than call it generational curses. But if your mother and father are witches, and then they, basically had you without confessing, without getting in a state of grace, etc., and you were born, you're going to probably be born with gifts. They're not gifts. It's a curse. Because when you become oppressed and possessed, you'll start to get some of these sixth sense things. Don't you remember one of the top 4 things that we talk about? That, this old thing, the Vatican looks for them. And they look for a supernatural knowledge. We saw in the movie, they're right. What's in this purse? Talking to the Italian pregnant woman in there, Anthony Hopkins. And she says an American dollar. And there's no way she would know that. Well, do you think you're gifted now? You're born gifted because you can tell that? No, you're demonized. And that's what a lot of these people are anyway. Psychic mediums and so forth. I mean, there's mystics in the church, and then there's the people who more have it because they're not with God, and it comes from some other source. Some can go either way. Where would Padre Pio be with his gifts if he had it, and then he decided that he wasn't going to go to church and become a priest anymore? Well, it can be influenced more by Satan than God, for example, if it was a gift, just as much as our influence of our thinking can. That we're going to not really think the thoughts that are inspired by the Holy Spirit, our guardian angels, and so forth. We're going to hear Satan's voice first. All right, let's see. I guess there's only so much you can go. Like I said, these are pre-scripted, not. So we will go about as long as we can go on a little rant here, and that's why you watch the show, right? The Art of the Deals now ends. God bless everybody, and we'll see you next time, or rather, you'll see me. Good night.